Life is full of moments that challenge our peace of mind. We've all been there. Someone says something that rubs us the wrong way, or someone's behavior tests our patience, and before we know it, we're overwhelmed with frustration. But what if I told you that you don't have to feel anger or be bothered by others? What if there's a way to walk through life untouched by the negativity around us? It starts with understanding one key truth: emotions are not reactions, they are choices. You have the power to decide how you respond. The challenge is that in moments of tension, it's easy to let our emotions control us, but we have the ability to make a different choice. One of the most powerful truths we can embrace is that emotional control begins with us. Too often we fall into the trap of thinking that external circumstances or the actions of others are responsible for how we feel. If someone cuts us off in traffic, if a colleague snaps at us, or if we experience any form of injustice, it's easy to assume that these external events are what trigger our emotions. We might even feel justified in our anger, frustration, or sadness, but the truth is, emotions are not determined by what happens outside of us. They are shaped by how we choose to respond from within. At the core of emotional control is the understanding that our reactions are a direct result of our thoughts. The way we interpret the situation dictates how we feel. Imagine someone says something hurtful to you. It's not the words themselves that create an emotional response. It's your perception of those words that triggers a reaction. If you perceive their words as an attack on your character, you might feel defensive or angry. However, if you view their words as a reflection of their own struggles or frustrations, your response could be more compassionate or neutral. Emotional control starts with how we interpret the world around us. The ability to control your emotions comes down to a conscious choice, how you choose to respond to the situation, no matter how challenging. While you may not always be able to control the actions of others, you always have control over your own reactions. This realization is empowering. It means that you are not at the mercy of external forces or other people's behavior. Instead, you hold the power to maintain your peace, regardless of what is happening around you. This concept is deeply rooted in self-awareness. When we are self-aware, we begin to recognize the signals within us that indicate when our emotions are starting to spiral. For instance, we might notice our heart rate increasing, our breath becoming shallow, or tightening in our chest when we feel upset. These physical signals are our body's way of communicating that an emotional reaction is coming. The more we become attuned to these subtle cues, the better equipped we are to take control before our emotions take control of us. Self-awareness also helps us recognize the underlying beliefs that fuel our emotional reactions. Often, our emotions are tied to deeper assumptions or stories we tell ourselves. For example, if we have a deep-seated belief that we need to be liked by others or that we must always be in control, we may react defensively when someone challenges us. On the other hand, if we are able to identify that these beliefs are not absolute truths, we can challenge them and choose a more measured response. Understanding our own mental and emotional patterns is a crucial step in gaining control over our feelings. Furthermore, emotional control is not about suppressing or denying our feelings. It's not about pretending that we don't feel hurt, frustrated, or angry when those emotions arise. Rather, it's about choosing how to express those feelings in a healthy way. Acknowledging our emotions without letting them govern our actions is key. For example, instead of shouting or lashing out in anger, we can express our emotions calmly and constructively. The goal is not to eliminate emotions, but to navigate them with wisdom and intentionality. By taking ownership of our emotions, we stop being passive recipients of whatever life throws our way. Instead, we become active participants in our emotional experience. We become the gatekeepers of our emotional world, deciding what to let in and what to block out. The more we practice emotional control, the easier it becomes to maintain a sense of peace and calm, even in the midst of chaos. Recognizing our emotional triggers is a critical step in developing emotional control. We all have certain situations, words, or behaviors that provoke a strong emotional reaction. These triggers can make us feel angry, frustrated, anxious, or hurt, often without warning. The challenge, however, is that many of us go through life reacting to these triggers without even fully understanding why they affect us the way they do. By becoming aware of these triggers, we can begin to take control over how we respond instead of letting our emotions run the show. A trigger is anything that sparks a strong emotional response in us. These can range from specific events, such as being criticized at work or being interrupted during a conversation, to more subtle moments, like a particular tone of voice or specific words someone uses. The key to recognizing these triggers is to reflect on the moments when you feel emotionally charged. Ask yourself, what was happening just before I felt this way? By identifying patterns in your emotional responses, you can begin to pinpoint the underlying triggers that set off those reactions. Often we're unaware of our emotional triggers because they are deeply rooted in our past experiences. These triggers can stem from past trauma, childhood experiences, insecurities, or even unhealed wounds. For instance, someone who has experienced rejection or abandonment in the past might feel deeply hurt if they perceive any form of distance or coldness from others, even when the intention is not to hurt them. The emotional response they experience may be more intense than the situation would warrant, as it's tied to a deeper fear or insecurity. In these cases, the trigger is not just about what's happening in the present moment, but also about the emotional baggage carried from the past. Another common trigger is when our expectations are not met. We all have a mental picture of how things should be, whether it's in our relationships, our work, or our daily lives. When those expectations are not fulfilled, feelings of disappointment or frustration can arise. For example, if we expect a friend to remember our birthday and they forget, it can feel like a personal attack, even if the oversight was unintentional. Expectations can set us up for emotional reactions, especially when they are not communicated or aligned with reality. Some emotional triggers are linked to specific people or behaviors. These might be habits or actions that others consistently do that push our boundaries. For example, someone who frequently interrupts when you're speaking may trigger frustration, or a person who always belittles your ideas might trigger feelings of inadequacy. The key is to recognize that these responses are often rooted in the perception that the other person's actions are intentionally directed at us. In reality, many of these behaviors are a reflection of the other person's issues or lack of self-awareness, not a deliberate attempt to provoke us. Recognizing triggers isn't about blaming others or external circumstances, it's about taking responsibility for how we choose to respond. When we become aware of what triggers us, we can prepare ourselves in advance to handle these situations with a more balanced and composed approach. For example, if you know that a certain person tends to trigger your frustration, you can consciously decide to approach the situation with patience, breathing through your response and choosing to see things from a different perspective. The more we understand our triggers, the more we can diffuse them before they escalate. Recognizing the patterns behind our emotional responses allows us to challenge automatic reactions and instead choose thoughtful, intentional responses. This process gives us the ability to break free from the cycle of knee-jerk emotional reactions and empowers us to take control of our emotional well-being. One of the most powerful tools we can use to manage our emotions and avoid getting overwhelmed by anger or frustration is the ability to shift our perspective. Often, our emotional reactions are deeply influenced by the way we view a situation or another person's actions. When we approach challenges or conflicts with a fixed perspective, we limit our ability to respond effectively. By consciously choosing to see things from a different angle, we can transform how we feel and how we react. The first step in shifting your perspective is understanding that your perception of an event or a person may not always be the full picture. Our minds tend to filter reality through the lens of our own experiences, fears, and assumptions. This means that when something happens, we often interpret it in a way that aligns with our pre-existing beliefs or emotional state. For example, if someone doesn't greet us in the way we expect, we might perceive their actions as a sign of disrespect or indifference. But what if the person is simply distracted, tired, or going through a tough time? The truth is, we often don't know the full context behind someone's behavior, and assuming the worst can lead to unnecessary anger. Shifting your perspective involves opening your mind to the possibility that there are multiple ways to interpret a situation. Instead of jumping to conclusions, take a step back and ask yourself, is there another explanation for why this is happening? When we allow ourselves to consider other viewpoints, we often find that our initial emotional response was based on incomplete or inaccurate information. By seeking to understand rather than immediately react, we create the space needed to choose a more measured and balanced response. One of the most effective ways to shift your perspective is to practice empathy. When we empathize with others, we make a conscious effort to understand their feelings, experiences, and challenges. This doesn't mean we have to agree with or condone their actions, but by considering their point of view, we begin to soften our emotional responses. For instance, if a colleague criticizes your work, instead of feeling insulted, try to consider their motivations. Maybe they're under pressure themselves, or perhaps they genuinely want to help you improve. When we shift from a mindset of judgment to one of empathy, we open ourselves to greater understanding and reduce the likelihood of emotional conflict. Another important aspect of shifting your perspective is realizing that not everything is personal. Often we take things that happen in our lives as direct reflections of our worth or value. If someone is rude to us, we might assume it's because we're unimportant or unworthy of respect. However, People's behavior is more often a reflection of their own struggles, stressors, or state of mind. Recognizing that someone else's actions are not always about us can be incredibly freeing. It allows us to detach our self-worth from the behavior of others and prevents us from feeling unnecessarily hurt or angry. Additionally, shifting perspective involves questioning our expectations. Many of us approach life with certain expectations of how things should go, whether it's how people should behave or how situations should unfold. When those expectations aren't met, we feel frustrated or disappointed. But expectations are often unrealistic or unattainable, and holding on to them can lead to constant dissatisfaction. By adjusting our expectations and accepting that life is unpredictable, we can prevent frustration from taking hold. This doesn't mean lowering standards. Rather, it's about accepting the reality of situations and being flexible in our responses. Ultimately, shifting your perspective requires the willingness to challenge your own assumptions, judgments, and emotional reactions. It's about moving from a reactive state to a more thoughtful and intentional one. By choosing to see things differently, we can respond with greater understanding, patience, and compassion, which leads to a calmer, more peaceful mindset. This ability to shift our perspective is one of the most empowering tools in our emotional toolbox, allowing us to navigate the world with grace and resilience. In the heat of an emotionally charged moment, it's easy to react impulsively. Someone says something hurtful, cuts us off in traffic, or challenges our beliefs, and our immediate instinct is often to react, lashing out in anger, frustration, or defensiveness. Reactivity is a natural response, but it rarely leads to positive outcomes. It's driven by emotion rather than rational thought, and often results in regret or further conflict. The alternative, however, is the practice of response, an intentional, thoughtful way of handling situations that allows us to maintain control over our emotions and actions. The first step to understanding the difference between reacting and responding is recognizing that reaction is automatic while response is deliberate. When we react, we're often governed by our emotions in the moment. We feel anger or frustration bubbling up, and without thinking, we let those feelings spill out. In these moments, we're on autopilot. Our body and mind are so focused on the immediate emotional stimulus that we don't pause to consider the consequences of our words or actions. In contrast, a response is something we choose. It's thoughtful, calculated, and usually measured. It begins with a moment of pause, taking a step back from the situation and gaining control over our emotional state before we say or do anything. This pause gives us time to reflect on the situation, gather our thoughts, and choose how we want to react in a way that aligns with our values and long-term goals. One of the key differences between reacting and responding is the level of awareness. When we react, we're often unaware of the deeper motivations behind our feelings. For example, when we're criticized, we might instantly feel defensive and angry, without considering that the criticism might be coming from a place of concern or a genuine desire to help us improve. Responding, on the other hand, requires us to examine the situation more deeply. We might take a moment to reflect on the critic's intentions or ask ourselves why we're feeling defensive. This level of awareness allows us to respond with clarity and purpose, rather than letting our emotions take the lead. A key benefit of responding instead of reacting is that it fosters healthier, more constructive conversations and relationships. When we react out of anger or frustration, it often leads to escalation. Our harsh words or actions can provoke the other person, leading to a cycle of hostility that is difficult to break. In contrast, responding calmly and thoughtfully creates an opportunity for mutual understanding and collaboration. For example, if a colleague criticizes our work, instead of responding with defensiveness, we might calmly ask for specific feedback or seek clarification. This opens the door to a productive conversation rather than a confrontation. Furthermore, responding gives us a sense of control. When we react impulsively, we often feel like we're at the mercy of our emotions. We might feel guilty afterward for saying things we didn't mean or for making the situation worse. Responding, however, allows us to take a step back and regain control of the conversation and our emotional state. It empowers us to choose how we show up in the moment. When we respond rather than react, we assert our emotional intelligence and are better able to manage difficult situations with grace. Another powerful aspect of responding is that it encourages us to practice patience and self-regulation. In our fast-paced world, we are often conditioned to react immediately, whether it's in conversations on social media or in situations of conflict. Yet, the more we practice responding thoughtfully, the more we cultivate patience and the ability to pause. We begin to realize that not every moment requires an immediate reaction, and that sometimes silence or waiting is the best response. Ultimately, responding is a choice that we can make in any moment. It requires us to break free from the automatic knee-jerk reactions we've conditioned ourselves to follow and instead approach situations with intentionality and emotional maturity. By choosing to respond rather than react, we maintain control over our emotions, engage in healthier communication, and foster stronger, more positive relationships. Patience and self-awareness are foundational qualities that allow us to maintain emotional control, especially in challenging situations. In our fast-paced world where everything is expected to happen instantly, it's easy to become impatient. When we don't get what we want when we want it, frustration can quickly set in, leading to emotional outbursts or poor decision-making. However, practicing patience and developing self-awareness can help us avoid these reactions, enabling us to navigate life with a sense of calm and clarity. Patience is not just about waiting for something or someone to change. True patience is about how we handle ourselves during the wait. It's the ability to stay calm and composed when things don't go according to plan or when we're faced with challenges that test our resilience. Often, impatience arises from a sense of urgency or fear that we're running out of time, fear of missing out, or fear of not being in control. But patience teaches us that not everything is urgent. And sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is wait, observe, and respond thoughtfully. The key to cultivating patience is understanding that we can't control everything. Many situations are beyond our influence, and we must learn to accept that. When we encounter delays or obstacles, our immediate reaction may be to feel annoyed or anxious, but by practicing patience, we give ourselves the opportunity to process the situation calmly. Patience is about creating space between the trigger and our response, allowing us to choose how to move forward rather than being swept away by our emotions. It's an active process that involves mindfulness and self-restraint. Self-awareness plays a critical role in fostering patience. Being self-aware means having an understanding of our emotions, thoughts, and reactions in real time. It's about recognizing when we're becoming frustrated, stressed, or upset before those emotions take control of our actions. This awareness helps us create a pause, a moment where we can step back and assess the situation before responding. For instance, if we feel our irritation rising during a conversation, self-awareness allows us to recognize that reaction before it turns into an outburst. Instead of responding impulsively, we can choose to breathe, take a moment, and decide how to address the issue in a measured and respectful way. Self-awareness also helps us identify our emotional triggers. When we understand what causes us to lose patience or become agitated, we can prepare ourselves in advance to handle those situations more effectively. It's like having a roadmap to our own emotional landscape. By knowing our triggers, we can develop strategies to deal with them, whether that means taking a break, adjusting our expectations, or reframing our thoughts. For example, if we know that we become frustrated when we're rushed, we can make an effort to leave extra time in our schedule so we don't feel pressure to hurry. Furthermore, self-awareness helps us assess our own needs and boundaries. Sometimes our impatience comes from a lack of self-care or exhaustion. When we're tired, hungry, or overwhelmed, our ability to stay patient and composed diminishes. Being self-aware means recognizing when we need rest, nourishment, or space so we can address those needs before they lead to irritability or stress. It's about tuning into ourselves and understanding that taking care of our well-being is essential to maintaining patience and emotional stability. Patience also involves accepting that some things are simply out of our control. In many situations, we cannot change the behavior of others or control external circumstances. However, we can control how we react to those things. When we practice patience, we learn to let go of the need to force outcomes or control everything around us. We start to embrace uncertainty and see challenges as opportunities for growth rather than as obstacles to overcome. The combination of patience and self-awareness creates a powerful foundation for emotional resilience. When we develop both of these qualities, we are better equipped to manage our reactions, respond thoughtfully to challenges, and maintain a sense of calm even in the face of adversity. These qualities help us become more intentional in how we interact with the world, allowing us to navigate life with grace and self-control. One of the most liberating realizations we can have in life is that we cannot control other people. The desire to influence, manipulate, or change the behavior of others is a common human tendency, often stemming from a need for validation, security, or a sense of control over our environment. However, The truth is that trying to control others is not only futile, but it also leads to frustration, resentment, and emotional turmoil. Letting go of the need to control others can lead to greater peace, healthier relationships, and a sense of personal empowerment. The first step in letting go of control is recognizing that everyone is an individual with their own thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. We cannot dictate how another person feels, thinks, or acts. It's a hard truth to accept, especially when we care deeply about someone or have strong opinions about what's best for them. However, it's important to understand that people are on their own journeys, shaped by their experiences, beliefs, and personal choices. Just because we believe we know what's best for someone doesn't mean that they share our perspective or that they are ready to make the changes we desire. Each person has their own path, and trying to impose our will on them only creates tension and resentment. When we try to control others, we also run the risk of neglecting our own needs and emotions. Focusing too much on others' actions and decisions takes us out of the present moment and away from our own growth. We may become so invested in changing someone else's behavior that we forget to nurture ourselves, our goals, and our well-being. This is particularly evident in relationships where we might feel responsible for fixing someone's problems or controlling their actions. But this only leads to burnout and resentment as we place our emotional well-being in the hands of someone else's choices. Letting go of control allows us to reclaim our personal power and focus on our own growth and happiness. In relationships, the need to control others often stems from a desire for reassurance or security. We want to ensure that the people we care about will act in ways that align with our values and desires. But the reality is that we cannot force someone to meet our expectations or follow a certain script. No matter how much we try to manipulate or influence their actions, people will make their own decisions, and those decisions may not always align with our hopes. Accepting this truth is crucial for maintaining a healthy relationship dynamic. Instead of trying to control someone's actions, we can learn to embrace the concept of letting go and allowing people to make their own choices, even if those choices are difficult for us to accept. One of the key benefits of letting go of control over others is the freedom it gives us. When we release the need to control others, we are no longer bound by their decisions or actions. We no longer carry the burden of trying to shape their behavior or reactions. This freedom allows us to live more authentically without the constant pressure of managing other people's lives. It also enables us to build healthier relationships based on mutual respect, where both parties have the space to grow and evolve without feeling constrained by each other's expectations. Letting go of control doesn't mean abandoning care or concern for others. It simply means recognizing that we cannot force change and that people must choose their own paths. We can still offer support, guidance, and love, but we must do so without expecting that our involvement will result in the outcomes we desire. When we stop trying to control others, we open up the space for them to grow, learn from their mistakes, and become the person they are meant to be. And in doing so, we also allow ourselves to grow and embrace the beauty of life's uncertainty. In essence, letting go of control over others is an act of self-liberation and acceptance. It frees us from the stress and frustration that come from trying to dictate others' lives and allows us to focus on our own journey. We no longer need to worry about others' actions because we have placed our trust in the fact that people are capable of making their own decisions. By relinquishing control, we create a more peaceful and fulfilling existence, both for ourselves and those around us. In conclusion, mastering emotional control and letting go of the need to control others are essential steps toward creating a peaceful and fulfilling life. By recognizing our emotional triggers, shifting our perspective, and choosing to respond rather than react, we take ownership of our emotions and actions. Practicing patience and self-awareness allows us to navigate challenges with composure, and when we let go of our desire to control others, we free ourselves from frustration and resentment. We begin to focus on our own growth and well-being while allowing others to walk their own paths. Ultimately, emotional control isn't about suppressing our feelings, but about understanding them and responding thoughtfully. It's about finding peace within ourselves and fostering healthier, more respectful relationships with those around us. When we embrace these practices, we create an environment where personal growth, understanding, and compassion thrive, leading to a more balanced and empowered life. By taking responsibility for our own emotions and letting go of control over others, we cultivate emotional resilience and create space for greater peace and happiness in our lives.